Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today for the DFSS CPPC training on the Head Start grant application and other grant-related actions. I'm Madeline Shea and I work in the Grants Unit. Today's training aims to help you to become familiar with each of DFSS's Head Start grants, to understand the different types of Head Start grant applications that you will see as a CPPC member, to become familiar with some grants management actions that often occur during the grant year, and to become familiar with Head Start grant-related documents that DFSS will present to you throughout the year. So just a really brief overview of where our Head Start grants originate from. Each year, the U.S. Congress appropriates federal funds for Head Start, which the President then signs into law. That determines how much money the program will have for the upcoming year. Head Start grant funds are administered by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Office of Head Start. And each year, DFSS, as a Head Start grantee, applies for funding through an annual grant application. As part of that grant application, DFSS's delegate agencies or contracted direct service providers each develop a grant application specific to their program that is then included in DFSS's overall grant application. Currently, DFSS has 3 Head Start grants that fund delegate agencies to provide community-based Head Start and early Head Start services across the city of Chicago. These are the Head Start Early Head Start grant, through which DFSS provides 7,404 Head Start slots for children ages 3 to 5. Just an important note there, currently DFSS is funded for 9,274 Head Start slots. However, our delegate agency capacity is for 7,404. So we are working with our Office of Head Start Regional Office to address this issue. Also through this grant, DFSS and its delegates provide 2,162 early Head Start slots for children birth to 3. The Early Head Start Child Care Partnership Grant provides 1,100 slots to children birth to 3. And the newest grant is the Early Head Start Expansion Grant, which provides 200 slots to children birth to 3. All of DFSS's Head Start grants are now on a December 1st through November 30th annual fiscal period, putting the annual due date for all of our grant applications at September 1st each year. All Head Start grants are on a 5-year cycle. Currently, DFSS has 42 Head Start delegate agencies providing community-based services. Many of you CPPC members are part of our delegate agencies, and this list probably looks familiar to you. When we develop our grant application with 42 Head Start delegate agencies, this means that 42 delegate agency grant applications get included into DFSS's grantee application. Similarly, DFSS has 35 early Head Start delegate agencies, many of whom are the same as the Head Start agencies. This means that there are 35 grant applications included. The Early Head Start Child Care Partnership Grant has 24 delegate agencies, and the Early Head Start Expansion Grant has 5 delegate agencies. The funding letter is the official notification from our funder, Administration of Children and Families, that lets us know that we can begin completing our grant application for program funds for the coming year. This is a key document that the CPPC members will always receive a copy of once it is issued to DFSS. This document lets us know how much in grant funds we can apply for, the type of application that we'll be completing, which we'll cover in a minute, the number and types of slots that we can apply for in our application, and the due date of the application and how it should be submitted. Here is a visual of a funding letter. Key things to note on this funding letter: the laser pointer, the grant number, which tells us which grant the letter's for, the due date of the grant application, the funding period for which the grant funds will fund, the amount of funds for which we can apply, and the funded slots the enrollment. So what is a grant application exactly? It is simply our formal request as a grantee for grant funds from our funder, in this case the Administration for Children and Families Office of Head Start. It lets our funder know what the proposed goals of our program are, demonstrates our ability to carry out the program, sets the plan for service delivery for the coming program year, and proposes the program's costs through the grant application budget. Now, when we develop grant applications, we can't just put whatever information we'd like in there. We have to follow very specific guidance. And Administration for Children and Families issues required grant application instructions that all Head Start grantees must follow as they develop their grant applications. This includes very specific questions that we have to answer and documents we must include in our application. So when we develop all of our Head Start grant applications, they strictly follow this instruction manual, and you will receive a copy of this with this training. So with the Head Start program and annual funding grant applications, we actually, throughout the course of the 5-year project period, will submit 2 different types of grant applications. The first is the baseline application. This is submitted once prior to the beginning of a brand new 5-year grant cycle. It's basically a longer document that sets the stage for the coming new project period, 5-year project period. This is when we create brand new goals and objectives and make any programmatic changes for the upcoming 5-year cycle. After that, after we submit our baseline application, we submit 4 continuation applications as part of the 5-year cycle. And these are really just update applications that let our funder know what progress we've made towards our program goals. It explains any changes that we've made to the program or our goals and allows us to submit a budget for the upcoming program year. Here is a broad picture of our DFSS annual Head Start grant application process for all 3 grants. And you'll see here that well before we even receive our official funding letter from the Administration for Children and Families, we are planning and working to roll out the grant application process to our delegate agencies so that their applications, including approvals from their board and parent policy committees, can be included in our full grantee application. After the delegate agency application process is final, we then finalize the DFSS grantee application, which includes securing CPPC and CCUO approval, at which point then we'll be ready to submit the full application by September 1st, the due date, via the electronic grants management system, Head Start Enterprise system, through which we submit our grant applications. When it's time to develop the grant application, we rely on information from various programmatic and administrative actions and activities throughout the year. For the total budget, we always use the amount awarded to us for each grant in their respective funding letters issued to us by the funder. The grant application also consists of information from community needs identified in the annual community needs assessment update, the annual self-assessment process, which gauges how well we support our delegates and work toward our program goals, feedback and discussion on program information from the CPPC and CCUO at meetings throughout the year, ongoing program monitoring and roundtables, and any areas identified through those that need correction or additional support, delegate agency feedback that's gathered at content area subcommittee meetings and EDPD meetings throughout the year. We regularly review grant expenditures, and we have to consider any new policy initiatives in the city or the state or any federal mandates with which we must comply that may impact the program. The major components of the Head Start grant application include these major items: the budget narrative, program goals, program narrative, program schedule, approvals, and then of course all of our delegate agency applications, which replicate the grantee application. So now we'll go through each of these components. First up is the budget, or what we call the SF424A. The major cost categories or object class categories include personnel, which includes the amount of funding needed for DFSS staff salaries that work on the Head Start and Early Head Start programs. Fringe benefits, which includes things like health insurance and Medicare and unemployment insurance and the pension fund. The travel cost category is specifically for out-of-town travel to conferences and meetings, and includes things like airfare and lodging. The equipment category is for items that are at least $5,000 in unit cost and have a useful life of at least 1 year. These are rare costs. More common are supplies costs, which include office supplies, as well as educational supplies for the program, curriculum materials, as well as health and safety janitorial type supplies. The contractual object class category is our largest line item in our budget, as it includes all of the delegate agency budgets, and those agency budgets are determined by how many slots they have and what the current cost per child rate they're allocated based on our available grant funds. The contractual category also includes the support service contracts, which basically are contracts with local subject matter experts, trainers, technical assistance providers that support our agencies as they provide program services across the city. We do not have a construction grant, so this line is not applicable. The other object class category includes everything else that's allowable under our grant, and this may be occupancy charges like utilities, the telephone, local travel for staff to drive to meetings or take the train, advertising and recruitment materials, facilities assessments, support for parents, maintenance and repair, membership fees for professional organizations, subscriptions, and registration for conferences. The indirect cost object class category covers our overhead costs to operate the program, and this is determined by our federally negotiated indirect cost rate, which is negotiated between the City of Chicago's Office of Budget Management and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Non-federal match or non-federal share, this is required in all grant applications. We, as a grantee, have to put up 20% of the cost of the program using non-federal sources, such as other grant money from a state grant or in-kind donations or volunteer hours. The non-federal match for our Head Start program at DFSS is provided through the delegate agencies and the volunteers that they bring into the classroom and their Preschool for All and Prevention Initiative contracts and things of that nature that we include as part of our grant application budget for non-federal match. Then I should mention that we always write a budget narrative to describe each of those costs in detail. The next major component of the grant application is the program narrative, and this is a very long document that describes our program goals, our service area, the needs of our community, and it describes our various content area systems for SIA, education and child development, health, family, community engagement, also our services for children with disabilities, how we transition children from early Head Start to Head Start and from Head Start to kindergarten, and our services for pregnant women who are enrolled in the early Head Start program. We also describe our systems for program governance, management, and quality improvement in the program narrative. Because our grant applications are very large, often 4,000 pages or more if we were to print them out, we condense the application information for review by the CPPC and CCUO, and we provide these key documents, which we will go over now. First is the SF424A, the summary budget, and we just covered these object class categories so you know what each category consists of and what those costs are for. And you will receive a copy of this with every single grant that we request approval for. So you can see here, these are the costs for program operation. As I mentioned, the contractual line item is always the largest because that is where the delegate agency costs for are budgeted. The non-federal match is here, and our total federal program cost is here. You will also receive the program goals chart. This chart lists the major goals and objectives for the program, the activities and action steps that we will use to achieve goals and objectives, how we'll track progress toward those goals, our anticipated outcomes working toward those goals, and any anticipated challenges that we expect to encounter throughout the process. You will also receive DFSS's school readiness goals. These are basically benchmarks that DFSS sets for child development outcomes across its delegate agencies. You receive progress reports on these in your meetings at least 3 times throughout the program year. Finally, we have 2 more to go. You will receive the program schedule. The program schedule is a key grant application document that shows how many slots each delegate agency is allocated, what types of program options those slots are, center-based, home-based, family childcare home, how many hours per day, days per week, days per year the slots operate, and information about the frequency of home visits that are provided to children and families throughout the year. This information is collected through the delegate agency applications, and then it's aggregated and gets input to our grants management online system. Finally, you will receive a grant application executive summary. This serves as a condensed version of the program narrative, which is often 60 pages long or more, so that you know what information is included in the full narrative. So it's important to note that during the grant year, there are other types of Head Start grant applications that DFSS may have to complete. One common one is a supplemental funding application, which is a non-competitive application and only available to current grantees. It is typically to provide grantees with an increase in funding for a specific reason, such as providing a cost of living adjustment increase, which is the most common one. As these applications are distinct from annual funding applications and are changes to already approved grants, when asking for CPPC and CCUO approval for these applications, we will provide the SF424A and a detailed grant application executive summary. A discretionary grant application is less common. It happens when new grant funds are appropriated in order to expand the Head Start program nationwide. This means that any eligible organization, not just current grantees, can competitively apply for funds for a new or expanded program, as these are often highly competitive nationwide. As discretionary applications have altogether different application requirements and questions that we must respond to, we will provide the SF424A summary budget, a grant application, executive summary, and any other key programmatic documents that help you to understand the newly proposed or expanded program that you'll be approving the grant application for. So typically, at least once per year, DFSS will need to revise its grant budget to shift funds from one object class category to another, and this requires formal requests to the funder that needs CPPC and CCUO approval. This often happens because costs in one area of the program are higher than originally budgeted, and costs in another area, thus the request to shift funds to cover the higher costs. This as I mentioned, requires governing body and parent policy council approval. Also, a carryover request is another one that requires formal requests submitted to the funder. This is when there are funds left over after a grant period is closed out, because a grantee is unable to finish a project or complete some programmatic function during that expected grant year. So for instance, grant funds may have been allocated to pay for playground repairs, but they are delayed due to bad weather. We can request to carry those funds over into the following budget period within the 5-year grant cycle to complete those repairs. CPPC and CCUO approval are also required as part of a carryover request. As these are much simpler requests and typically just mean a budget change, when asking for CPPC and CCUO approval, we'll provide you with the SF424A summary budget and a summary of the request. When we submit all grant applications, budget revisions, carryover requests, we always document CPPC and CCUO approval in this way. There's a statement signed by the chair, a list of signatures from CPPC members who have approved the grant application, and minutes from the meeting, conference call, or electronic voting process that document the approval. Finally, after our grant applications, budget revision, or carryover request are reviewed, vetted, and approved by our funder, we receive an official notice of award. This communicates the dollar amount awarded as a result of the grant application we submitted, the standards, terms, and conditions that we must abide by, any additional key programmatic information or specific instructions from our regional office. This is not an item that gets approved by the CPPC and CCUO, as it comes to DFSS already executed by the federal government. Here is a visual of a notice of award. Key things to note: the grant number, the budget period for which the funds are being awarded. Here's the descriptive title of the program. In this case, it's the Early Head Start Expansion Grant. The approved budget for which we applied in our grant application, and the amount of funds being awarded in this grant action. Finally, here's where you would see if the regional office is communicating specific information to us in the remarks. That concludes this training on DFSS Head Start grants and grant-related actions. I hope it was informative.